The mysterious birth. The night was silent, except for the whispering winds that rustled through the tall baobab trees. Inside a small hut on the edge of the village, Naima groaned in pain. Sweat dripped from her forehead as she struggled alone, bringing a new life into the world. There was no one to help her, no one to witness the moment. But Naima was not afraid. She had always known this day would come. With one final cry, the baby's first wail echoed through the hut. A girl. Perfect, small, and fragile. Naima gently placed her on the woven mat near the fire. The child's tiny fist curled, her breath steady. A deep warmth filled Naima's heart. But she had no time to linger. With trembling hands, Naima walked to the door. As she stepped outside, her body began to change. Her smooth brown skin rippled, shifting into something else. Her legs twisted and stretched, muscles expanding. Her spine arched, fur sprouting from her back. Her fingers disappeared, replaced by massive paws tipped with sharp claws. In the moonlight, her true form was revealed, a majestic golden lioness. For a moment, she turned back toward the hut, her glowing amber eyes locked on the child inside. Then, without hesitation, she leaped into the dense jungle, disappearing into the night. A shocking discovery. That evening, Jabari, a humble farmer, returned home from the fields. His arms ached from a long day's walk, but his heart was light. He had planted enough for a rich harvest this season, and he was eager to see his wife, Naima. But as he stepped into their hut, a deep unease settled over him. The house was too quiet. Naima, he called, setting down his tools. Silence. Then, a sound, soft, fragile. A baby's cry. Jabari's chest tightened. His feet carried him toward the sound. And there, lying alone on a woven mat, was a newborn baby girl. She was wrapped in a thin cloth, her small face wrinkled from crying. Jabari's heart pounded as he frantically searched the hut. Naima. Where are you? But she was nowhere to be found. Outside, the sun had almost set, and the evening shadows stretched long. Jabari's gaze fell to the ground near the doorway. His breath caught. A single golden feather lay there, glistening in the fading light. Jabari bent down and picked it up. The feather was soft, almost warm in his hands, as if it carried some kind of power. Something was not right. A dream of warning. That night, Jabari barely slept. He sat by the fire, the baby bundled in his arms. Every time he looked at her, his heart ached with questions. Where was Naima? Why would she leave? And what was the meaning of the golden feather? As the fire crackled low, sleep finally took him. In his dreams, Naima appeared before him. She was as he remembered, tall, beautiful, her dark eyes filled with wisdom. But something about her had changed. She glowed with an otherworldly light. Jabari tried to speak, but she raised a hand to silence him. I cannot stay, she said softly. I came into your life to bring you wealth, and now I must go. Jabari's heart clenched. Why? What happened? Naima's gaze dropped to the sleeping baby in his arms. I leave behind a gift, she whispered. But listen well, Jabari. Your wealth, your farm, your success, it all depends on this child. If she suffers, if she dies, your fortune will turn to dust. Jabari shook his head. I don't understand. But Naima was already fading, her body dissolving like mist. Her final words echoed in the darkness. Protect her. Jabari woke with a start, his forehead damp with sweat. The fire had nearly gone out, leaving the hut in shadows. The baby stirred in his arms. Slowly, Jabari looked down at her and understood. This child, his daughter, was more than she seemed. She was his fate. She was his blessing. He pressed a gentle hand against her small head and whispered, "Your name will be Zola. A blessing upon my home. And I swear, I will protect you." Outside, the wind howled softly through the trees. Deep within the jungle, golden eyes watched from the darkness. A cruel new wife. 5 months passed, and the weight of loneliness pressed upon Jabari's heart. The village elders urged him to remarry. "A child cannot grow without a mother," they said. "Zola needs a woman's touch." Jabari resisted at first, but the whispers grew louder. The villagers pointed out a woman, Ebony, the daughter of a wealthy trader. She was young and beautiful, her skin smooth as polished ebony, her eyes deep like the river at dawn. Jabari, desperate to provide Zola with a mother, took Ebony as his wife. At first, she seemed perfect. She held Zola gently, cooing sweet words whenever Jabari was near. She stroked the baby's head and smiled warmly. Jabari's heart swelled with relief. Perhaps this was the right choice. But when Jabari left for the fields, the mask fell away. A mother's cruelty. The moment Jabari disappeared beyond the hills, Ebony's sweet smile faded into a sneer. She hated Zola. She hated the way Jabari doted on the child. She hated how the villagers spoke of Zola as blessed. Most of all, she hated how Jabari still kept the golden feather near his bed, refusing to forget his first wife. The jealousy inside her festered like a rotting wound. She refused to carry Zola in her arms. Instead, she locked the child in a dark, empty room. No food. No comfort. Only silence. When Zola cried, Ebony ignored her. When Zola wailed, she covered her ears. But when Jabari returned home, Ebony became the perfect wife again, holding Zola, kissing her forehead, pretending to love the child. Jabari, exhausted from work, never saw the truth. A wicked plan. Days turned into weeks. The anger inside Ebony grew like a storm cloud ready to burst. She could not bear it anymore. Zola had to go. One afternoon, while Jabari was away, Ebony wrapped the baby in a cloth and carried her toward Shadow Song Forest, a place cursed by the elders. No one who entered ever returned. The trees were ancient, their branches twisted like gnarled fingers. The air was thick, heavy with whispers of spirits long forgotten. Ebony shivered but pressed forward. She walked deeper into the shadows until she reached a massive baobab tree, its roots stretching wide like open arms. This would be the place. She laid Zola at the base of the tree. The child's golden eyes blinked up at her, innocent, trusting. Ebony turned away, spotting a jagged stone near the path. Her fingers closed around it. She would end this now. No more crying. No more jealousy. Just peace. She took a deep breath, turned back to face the child. And Zola was gone. The vanishing. Ebony froze. Her breath hitched. The baby had been lying there only seconds ago. The wind howled through the trees. The branches swayed, their shadows stretching like clawed hands. She spun around, her eyes darting in every direction. There was no sign of movement. No footprints. No sound. Just emptiness. Ebony's hands trembled. She clutched her chest, her heart pounding like a war drum. A feeling wrapped around her throat like a noose, a feeling she had never known before. Fear. Had something taken the child? Was the forest alive? The wind seemed to whisper around her, a soft, taunting laugh. Ebony took a shaky step backward. Then another. Then she ran. She didn't stop running until she was back at the village, gasping for air. The lie. Ebony forced herself to think. She couldn't tell Jabari what had happened. If she did, he would never forgive her. So she did what she did best. She lied. That evening, when Jabari returned home, he found Ebony weeping, her clothes torn, her face smeared with dirt. "What happened?" he asked, his voice sharp with worry. Ebony sobbed, clutching his arm. "A beast," she whispered. "A great beast attacked us in the forest." Jabari's blood ran cold. "Where is Zola?" Ebony held up a torn cloth, Zola's cloth, stained in blood. Jabari's legs gave out beneath him. His cry shook the heavens. That night, he sat by the fire, his hands gripping his hair, his soul shattered. And in the distant darkness, in the heart of Shadow Song Forest, golden eyes watched from the trees. Waiting. The hunting begins. Ebony sat by the fire, her hands trembling. The village women had gathered around her, whispering words of comfort. She pressed her blood-stained cloth against her face, letting fake sobs shake her body. Jabari knelt before her, his face drained of all color. "You must have fought hard," he whispered. His hands clenched into fists. "You tried to protect her." Ebony nodded weakly, casting her eyes downward to hide the truth. A hush fell over the room. Outside, the night stretched wide, the wind whispering through the trees. Somewhere in the darkness, something listened. And then, the first sign appeared. The golden eyes. That night, Ebony tossed and turned in bed. The wind outside had picked up, rattling the thatched roof. She sighed, rolling onto her side. Then, a shadow moved across the room. Her breath hitched. Slowly, she turned her head toward the doorway. Two glowing golden eyes peered at her from the darkness. Her heart slammed against her ribs. The air in the hut grew heavy. The fire flickered, casting strange shapes across the walls. Ebony squeezed her eyes shut. "It's my mind playing tricks on me." But when she opened them again, the eyes were closer. Watching. Ebony shrieked, grabbing a clay pot and hurling it toward the door. The pot shattered, sending pieces across the floor. Jabari bolted upright, reaching for his hunting spear. "What is it?" Ebony's lips trembled. "I saw something," she whispered. "I saw." But when she turned back, the golden eyes were gone. The night was still once more. Jabari frowned but lay back down. "You've been through much today. Try to sleep." Ebony nodded, curling beneath her blanket. But she did not sleep. She could still feel the eyes on her. Watching. Waiting. The curse unfolds. At dawn, Jabari walked to his farm as he always did, expecting to start another day of hard work. But something was wrong. The moment he reached his land, he stumbled back in shock. His once lush fields were dead. The crops he had planted with such care had withered overnight. The earth was cracked and dry, as if the sun had burned away its life in mere hours. The cattle refused to graze. The chickens would not leave their coops. Even the river nearby, which had always flowed strong, had turned murky and lifeless. Jabari fell to his knees, gripping his hair. No. This cannot be. A deep dread crawled through his bones. He had always believed in the spirits of the land. And now, it was as if the earth itself was mourning. Something unnatural had happened. And Jabari knew it had to do with Zola. The nightmares. That night, Ebony sat near the fire, unable to eat. The village had already begun to whisper. "Jabari's wealth is fading," the elders murmured. "His land is cursed." Ebony clenched her fist. "I did this for a better life. So why does it feel like everything is slipping away?" She sighed and lifted a bowl of stew to her lips. Then froze. A giggle echoed through the room. Soft. Playful. A child's giggle. Ebony whirled around, her eyes darting to every corner of the hut. The fire crackled, casting long shadows. The laughter came again, this time, closer. Her hands turned ice cold. She grabbed the bowl, ready to throw it. But when she lifted the lid, the color drained from her face. Inside the bowl, floating among the broth, was a single golden feather. Ebony screamed, dropping the bowl. The clay shattered, splashing stew across the floor. Jabari rushed inside. "What is it now?" Ebony couldn't speak. She could only stare at the golden feather lying in the mess at her feet. Jabari bent down and picked it up. His fingers trembled. He recognized it. It was the same golden feather Naima had left behind. Jabari's gaze slowly lifted to his wife, suspicion creeping into his eyes. Ebony swallowed hard. The silent shadow. That night, Ebony lay stiff in bed, her pulse racing. Sleep did not come easily. And when she finally drifted into restless dreams, she saw her. Zola. The child stood at the edge of the forest, her golden eyes gleaming. She was smiling. Smiling at Ebony. Ebony's breath came in sharp gasps. She tried to move, tried to speak, but her body would not obey. Zola lifted her small hand and pointed. The wind howled. Leaves swirled around them. Ebony could not breathe. Then, Zola's smile widened, and her soft voice whispered, "I see you." Ebony's scream ripped through the night. She bolted upright, gasping, drenched in sweat. Jabari groaned, turning toward her. "What now?" Ebony stared at the doorway, her body shaking. The door was open. The wind whispered through it, carrying a faint sound of laughter. She clenched her hands over her ears, but the laughter did not stop. It never stopped, the return of the lost child. The years dragged on like an endless drought. Jabari's once thriving land had turned into a graveyard of dust and decay. The golden harvest that once made him a respected man in the village were gone. His cattle had withered away, one by one. His wealth, his pride, everything had crumbled. The villagers whispered behind his back. Some pitied him. Others feared him. The spirits have abandoned him, they said. Jabari could not deny it. He had lost everything. And deep in his heart, he knew it all began the day Zola disappeared. A stranger at the farm. One afternoon, Jabari sat on a broken stool near his ruined farm, staring at the cracked earth beneath him. The sun burned hot above, yet a strange chill clung to the air. He sighed, rubbing his temples. His belly ached from hunger. How much longer can I live like this? Then, a shadow fell over him. Jabari looked up. A child stood before him. A little girl, no older than 6. Her feet were bare, her dress tattered, her dark curls wild from the wind. She gazed at him with striking golden eyes. "I am hungry," she said softly. Jabari's heart clenched. Those eyes. They were Naima's eyes. He swallowed hard. Where are your parents?" The girl didn't answer. She simply stared at him, silent. Knowing. Jabari felt something deep inside him shift. For the first time in years, the emptiness in his chest softened. "Come," he said. "You will eat. A new name, a new beginning." Jabari brought the child home, ignoring the hunger in his own stomach as he gave her the last of his food. She ate quietly, her golden eyes flickering in the firelight. Something about her calmed him, like a cool breeze after a scorching day. When she had finished, she turned to him. "You are kind," she said. Jabari smiled. "What is your name, child?" She hesitated, then shook her head. "I don't remember." Jabari's throat tightened. He placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Then I will give you one." He thought for a moment, then said, "Amora." It means grace. The girl smiled, a small, knowing smile. And from that moment, everything changed. The shift. That night, the house felt different. For years, it had been filled with nothing but sorrow, but now, warmth seemed to settle into the very walls. The fire burned brighter. The air felt lighter. Jabari slept without nightmares for the first time since Zola had vanished. And when the morning sun rose, he stepped outside to find his land had healed. The once cracked earth was now moist and rich. The crops that refused to grow had sprouted overnight. The river, once murky and still, flowed clear and strong again. Jabari staggered back, his breath stolen by the sight. It was as if the earth itself had been waiting for someone, to return. The curse had lifted. Abini's horror. Inside the hut, Abini had barely slept. Her dreams were filled with whispers. Shadows moved through her mind, pulling her toward the past. The moment she laid eyes on Amora, she felt it, a deep, gut-wrenching fear. She knew. She knew. Her hands trembled as she grabbed Jabari's arm. Where did she come from? She demanded. Jabari's face was calm, even peaceful. She was hungry. She has no family. Abini's stomach churned. She couldn't take her eyes off the girl. Amora was watching her. Her golden eyes shone with a knowing light. Abini's breath came in short gasps. She staggered backward. It was impossible. Zola was gone. I made sure of it. Yet here stood this girl, with the same golden eyes. The same soft smile. She could not be alive. She could not be here. And yet, she was. Abini swallowed hard. A deep, cold dread crept through her veins. Zola has returned. But how? And more importantly, what does she want? The final deception. Abini's fear twisted into something darker, desperation. She could not let this child stay. Every moment Amora remained in their home, Jabari's love for her grew. His farm flourished, his joy returned, and the villagers whispered of his newfound luck. Abini, however, saw only a ghost. Every time she looked at Amora, she saw Zola. This is not just a child. This is a curse upon me. And she would not allow it. A visit to the sorcerer. The sun had barely begun to set when Abini slipped away from the village, wrapping herself in a dark shawl. She moved quickly through the narrow pathways, following a road no decent woman dared take after nightfall. Her feet carried her toward the hut of Kano, the village sorcerer. He was feared by all, known for his dark magic. But Abini no longer cared for fear. She reached his door and knocked 3 times. A voice, deep and thick like smoke, answered from within. Enter. Abini stepped inside. The room smelled of damp earth and burnt herbs. Strange bones and charms hung from the ceiling, swaying gently in the dim light. At the center of the room sat Kano, his face hidden beneath a hood, his fingers tracing the rim of a blackened clay bowl. What do you seek? He rasped. Abini's voice was a whisper. I need to be rid of a child. Kano's lips curled. Rid of. Or destroy? She hesitated. Destroy, she said at last. Kano nodded, as if he had been expecting this answer. He reached beside him and lifted a small black stone. This will do as you wish, he said. Place it under your husband's pillow. As long as it remains there, his land will rot, his wealth will fade, and he will believe the child is cursed. Abini reached for the stone, but before she could take it, Kano's voice dropped to a whisper. Be warned, he said, his eyes narrowing. If this stone touches pure water, the curse will return to you, 3-fold. Abini barely heard him. She dropped a handful of gold coins into his bowl and snatched the stone from his fingers. She left without looking back. A night of darkness. That night, Jabari slept soundly, his heart lighter than it had been in years. The presence of Amora in his home filled him with a peace he could not explain. Abini, however, could not sleep. She lay beside him, her hands trembling beneath the blanket, the black stone hidden in her palm. The moment Jabari turned in his sleep, she slipped the stone under his pillow. A slow smile crept onto her lips. By morning, everything would fall apart. Jabari would wake to find his land dead again, his animals starving, his fortune crumbling. He would blame Amora. And then, he would send the child away. Satisfied, Ebony closed her eyes. But she did not see the golden eyes watching her from the doorway. Amora's intervention. Amora had known. She had felt it in the air, the moment Ebony returned that evening. A dark energy had entered the house with her. Now, as Ebony drifted into sleep, Amora moved silently. She slipped into the room, her bare feet making no sound on the floor. The black stone called to her, its evil whispering in the shadows. Carefully, she lifted the pillow and took the stone into her hands. She did not hesitate. Amora walked outside to the river that ran near their home. The water was clear, untouched by man's corruption. She took a deep breath, and with a soft whisper, she placed the stone in the water. The moment it touched the surface, boom! A thunderclap split the sky in half, shaking the ground beneath her feet. A powerful wind rushed through the trees, bending them backward. And then, Ebony's scream tore through the night. The curse returns. Inside the hut, Ebony had woken to searing pain. Her hands burned as if fire crawled beneath her skin. She stumbled out of bed, her legs trembling. "What's happening?" she gasped. Jabari shot up, startled. "Ebony." She clutched her chest, gasping for air. "Something is wrong. Something is." Her voice caught in her throat. Her hands. Her skin. It was cracking. Splitting. Like dry earth after a long drought, her flesh began to break apart. She turned toward the doorway. And there stood Amora. Calm. Still. Watching. Jabari's breath hitched. Ebony's knees buckled. "No. No." She fell forward, her hands digging into the dirt. The cracks in her skin spread up her arms, across her face. The wind howled through the hut, and with one final scream, Ebony vanished into the night. The end of a curse. For a long moment, silence filled the hut. Jabari stared at the empty space where his wife had once stood. His hands trembled. His breath came in uneven gasps. Then, slowly, he turned to Amora. What just happened?" The little girl stepped forward. She looked into his eyes, her golden gaze calm. "You are free now," she said softly. Jabari swallowed hard. His hands clenched at his sides. Deep in his heart, he knew the truth. This child, this blessing, was Zola. And she had come back not for revenge, but to set things right. Jabari fell to his knees, his eyes wet with unshed tears. "Thank you," he whispered. Outside, the first rays of dawn stretched across the land. And as the light returned, so did Jabari's hope. A new beginning had come. The truth revealed. The silence in the hut stretched long and deep. Jabari stared at the empty space where Ebony had stood just moments ago, her final scream still lingering in the air. His hands trembled. His heart pounded. The wind had stilled, leaving the night in heavy quiet. Then, a soft voice broke the silence. "You are free now." Jabari's head snapped toward the little girl standing in the doorway. Amora. Her golden eyes shimmered in the dim light, calm and unwavering. Jabari swallowed hard. He had felt something strange about her from the beginning. Something familiar. Something ancient. The weight of everything, the years of suffering, the loss, the pain, the guilt, came crashing down on him at once. His breath hitched. His hands clenched into fists. Slowly, his voice barely a whisper, he asked, "Who are you?" a smile of knowing. Amora tilted her head slightly, watching him with patient eyes. "I know you lost your daughter," she said softly. Her voice was not just that of a child. It carried wisdom. Memories. Jabari felt his pulse quicken. "I know your first wife disappeared," Amora continued. Jabari took a shaky step forward. His vision blurred, his mind spinning. The golden feather, Naima's last trace, still lay where he had kept it all these years, near his sleeping mat. "Are you?" Jabari's voice faltered. He could barely bring himself to say the words. His lips trembled. "Are you Zola?" For a long moment, Amora did not answer. Then, she nodded. "Yes." A father's tears. Jabari's legs gave out beneath him. He fell to his knees, his breath coming in gasps. He did not know whether to laugh or to weep. His daughter. His blessing. His Zola. She had come back to him. Jabari lifted a trembling hand, reaching toward her as if she might disappear again. She did not. Instead, she stepped forward and placed her small hands in his. Jabari's chest heaved with emotion, his heart swelling with more love than he had ever known. Tears spilled from his eyes as he pulled her into his arms, clutching her as though he would never let go again. "I thought I lost you," he whispered. "You never lost me, Zola Mamad. I was always near." Jabari closed his eyes, letting the warmth of her presence settle into his soul. He had been given a second chance. A chance to do what he had sworn to do from the beginning. To protect her. To cherish her. To never let harm come to her again. The golden feathers glow. A soft light filled the room, flickering like a flame. Jabari turned his head toward his sleeping mat. His breath caught. The golden feather, Naima's last gift, was glowing. Not dimly, not faintly. It shone as bright as the rising sun. A warmth spread through his chest, wrapping around him like an embrace. Jabari felt it. Naima's presence. She was here. Watching. Smiling. Blessing. Jabari bowed his head, pressing his forehead to Zola's. A deep peace settled over them. The past had been full of pain and betrayal. But the future. The future was theirs to build anew. Together. A new beginning. The days that followed were gentle and quiet, like the first rains after a long drought. The shadows of the past had lifted, and in their place, a new light had begun to shine. Jabari woke each morning with purpose again. His hands worked the soil, and the land flourished beneath his care. The farm, once cursed and barren, breathed with life once more. Green fields stretched as far as the eye could see, rivers ran fresh, and the cattle grew strong. But it was not the gold, nor the harvest, nor the wealth that brought Jabari true joy. It was the laughter of his daughter, echoing through the house. The warmth of her small hand in his. The way she called him Baba, with trust in her voice. This was his real treasure. And he would never forget it again. A loving heart. The village, once wary of Jabari's misfortunes, welcomed him back with open arms. He was no longer the cursed man whose land had died. He was Jabari, the farmer who had been blessed twice. Yet, even as his home filled with love, one thing remained unfinished. Amora had no mother. Jabari had been afraid to marry again, afraid of choosing another woman who would harm his child. But fate, in its kindness, led him to Sod. She was different from Abani in every way. Where Abani's beauty had hidden jealousy, Sod's shone with kindness. Where Abani had despised Amora, Sod adored her at first glance. She knelt before the child, cupping her face gently in her hands. "Amora," she whispered, "you will never be alone again." And for the first time, Amora felt the love of a mother's touch. Jabari knew, in that moment, that he had made the right choice. A future of love. With Abani gone, peace settled over their home. The nightmares stopped. The whispers in the wind faded. And Amora, once a lost and abandoned child, grew into a wise and kind young woman. The village respected her. The children followed her, listening to her stories. People marveled at her wisdom, though she was still young. Naima's spirit flows through her, the elders would say. And in their hearts, they knew it was true. A sign from the jungle. One evening, as the sun began to sink into the horizon, Amora stood outside their home, watching the sky turn gold and crimson. Jabari joined her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. His heart was full. The past had tried to steal everything from him. But he had won. And he had something far greater than gold, he had family. As they stood together, a movement caught Amora's eye. She gasped softly. At the edge of the jungle, just beyond the tall grass, stood a golden lioness. Her fur gleamed like the setting sun. Her eyes, deep, knowing, eternal, watched them with silent pride. For a long moment, she stood there, unmoving. Then, she turned and vanished into the jungle, swallowed by the trees. Jabari placed a hand over his heart. He did not need to speak. He knew. Naima had never truly left. She had been watching. And now, she was smiling. The end.